and voted on in the Queen's speech. If these things were to happen, surely that decision gets made collectively at cabinet level and sold to the country. And I can't help feeling that actually what's going on here is there are some who think that whilst Mrs May might have got this government up and running, that she isn't going to last for very long, and I think we're seeing some jockeying for position. That's my view. So I don't think they have got much credibility. I think they're in real trouble, and I think it's bad news, because there are really important things for this government to do, not least of which is the safety of our high-rise towers all over the country. Oh, and of course there's Brexit as well as the clock ticks away. So if you think, no, Nigel, you're wrong, actually, this is what we elected the government to do, it's all fine and dandy, well, call me on 0345 6060 973, or if you perhaps rather agree with me and think that it's a complete shambles and they better sort their act out, PDQ, then you can text at 84850, or perhaps you might like to speculate as to how long Mrs May is going to last and whether I'm right that what's actually playing out here is a battle for the next leadership of the Conservative Party and therefore the Prime Ministership, in which case on Farage, on LBC, at LBC, you can tweet to me. So what do you think? Does this government have any credibility left at all? And against the backdrop of all of this, I think it's quite important to talk a little bit about the deficit. Now, I know people get confused with what deficit and debt is. The deficit is the annual amount that we overspend against what we earn, and that accumulates up into what is the national debt. That's the amount of debt we've been building up since we fought Napoleon. It's been building up, for over a couple of hundred years. There have been times in recent history, the late 1980s being an example, when in fact the government every year was paying off chunks of our national debt. But the total amount of debt that we as a country had in 2010, when David Cameron first walked into Downing Street, was about £650 billion. It is now, in 2017, nearly £1.7 trillion. So we've more than doubled the national debt over the course of the last 7 years. And do you remember in the election campaign, the big hit against the Labour Party when Corbyn decided to appear on that big debate, and Amber Rudd stood in for the Prime Minister, who for some reason didn't want to be there. And the line that Amber Rudd used is, Labour are promising money on this, on that. They've got a magic money tree. And it was a really good line. It kind of worked, but actually, the truth of it is that it's now the biter bit. Because how Michael Gove can pretend that you can put up the pay of the public sector by more than 1% without affecting the deficit unless you cut something else, I'm afraid they're beginning to look a bit like they've got a magic money tree. John in Henley, what do you think?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I think, unfortunately, very unfortunately, this government is in a complete mess. Theresa May is not listening to not only some of her ministers, but also the general public. The general public want to give the public sector workers a good pay rise.
Yeah.
Now, that's not difficult to do, which I'll explain if you wish, but it's not difficult to do. But why is she holding out on this? All it's going to do is destroy the Conservative Party for the next election, whenever that may be.
Well, it looks to me, John, although however long she holds out on this, and Philip Hammond hold out on this, that probably by the time the autumn statement budget comes, they'll probably have shifted positions. So I do understand what you're saying. But let me ask you, John, let me ask you what I would call the Nick Ferrari question, which, if you remember, was put to Diane Abbott and others in the election campaign, which is, how would you pay for it?
Cut the foreign aid budget to exactly the same as what the USA pay, 0.2% of our GDP instead of 0.7%.
Okay, and so you think that's it? You know, we cut the foreign aid budget on the basis that it's time to put our own people first, yeah?
Exactly. It's about time that happened.
Wouldn't you perhaps have some slight pangs of guilt that we wouldn't be helping poor people in third world countries?
Not really, because a lot of our money, millions, goes to countries like North Korea, India, China.
Yep.
It's ridiculous that our people, our own people, including the pensioners, who they wanted to hammer as well, are suffering because, really, I believe, of the foreign aid budget. And if they cut that to what the Americans do with their foreign aid budget, we could pay for all those things without raising taxes.
Right, John, no, you've been very clear on that. And I'm going to say this to everybody. Anyone that rings in and says we should pay our public sector workers more than 1%, you've got to think we've got to try and get this annual deficit down because of the way our national debt is accumulating. I explained it a few moments ago. It's more than doubled over the course of the last 7 years. We are leaving a very, very heavy millstone around the neck of the next generation. Kevin in Rugby, how long is this government going to last, Kevin?
Not very long. I think one clear indication that it's perhaps not going to last as long as the full term is that the DUP deal to get that extra £1 billion all of it was arranged for it to be spent within the first 2 years. So clearly they don't think it's going to last very long.
It could be, Kevin. It could be that they want to get the $1 billion for the first 2 years and then come back for more.
Or it could be that they just don't think it's going to last very long.
Sure.
I don't think that Theresa May has any credibility. I think she was picked from the high-up Europhiles in the Conservative Party because she was the most incompetent person possible to tackle Brexit. They knew she would fail, as she is. She's launched a general election just for vanity reasons, and the calls to scrap public sector pay is just a desperate pandering to the middle ground. There's no real choice in democracy nowadays.
Well, the Democratic argument, Kevin, is that we voted for a Conservative Party, which is the biggest party, on the basis they would keep the cap. They put it in the Queen's speech. They are very good at U-turning on everything, aren't they? There's just no difference between Labour and the Conservatives. They both love uncontrolled immigration, both want it to use it as a tool for big business to lower the value of people's labour. Both want to ensure immigration stays at least at 200k for the next few years to come. Both love Orwellian levels of spying. Both probably want to keep us in the European arrest warrant. Both support abortion. There's no real difference now. I just don't see any point. But do both now support Brexit?
Yes, they do, yes.
Yeah. That to me was the one thing that I thought last week was very interesting, was that when Corbyn sacked three, of his own shadow cabinet for defying him over the single market, I suddenly thought, wow, we've even got consensus on Brexit. What kind of Brexit, what it exactly means, that does remain to be seen. But Kevin, I do take your point that actually the real differences between the two are not that big, are they?
No, not at all. It's a complete illusion of choice. I think people would be much better off voting for a third party like either UKIP or perhaps some further to the right, or even the Lib Dems. Just the status quo won't change if people keep voting for it. And people, if they're going to vote at all, should vote for third parties.
Well, the one thing that did change things was the referendum, Kevin, wasn't it? And so maybe if we had more referendums, we'd get more change.
I think, as you know, the European Union doesn't seem to like referendums very much. They seem to think that when they have them, people are wrong. So they make every attempt to go back in it and change it. And
they do. They've
red flag that perhaps it's not.
They've bullied everybody else, but you know what, Kevin? They're not going to bully us. I'm confident of that. Thank you, Kevin. Saying frankly, there's not much to choose between any of them. What does James and Hopton think? James, good evening. Is Mrs May going to survive until the Tory conference?
Hi, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you.
My main point is, when has this government ever had credibility? I'd say take some major policy issues. You have a plurality in this country for the reintroduction of the death penalty. You have the majority of nationalisation of the railways. You have a majority for immigration control. And what do we have? We have a justice system that is allergic to the use of punishment. Our railways are run by foreign governments. Our native birth rate means that just 6 in 10 babies born in this country are natives. So what credibility has this government got?
Well, they did get a Queen's speech, voted on through the House of Commons, so they should, in theory, have credibility. And yet, within a week, you've got the Foreign Secretary effectively at war with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I think, James, what's going on is people are putting their own careers, their own advancement, their own promotion, their own ambition above the interests of a country having a united government with some important things to do. That's what I think, James. What do you think?
I agree with that, but it's largely sort of posturing within a singular bubble in Westminster, but that's always been the case. I mean, take the Blair government, take Cameron. There's never been large-scale support in this country for mass migration, and yet we've had it for the last 20 years. So how is it any different other than the fact that it's now over Europe rather than migration or the death penalty or railways?
No, James, I understand that, and I say the same thing I said to Kevin, that the only thing we've seen in modern times that has changed anything was that referendum on European Union membership, and on the basis of that, and seeing in many ways how similar these parties are now, I've got to tell you, James, I want to see more referendums. I really do. Thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. We're less than a fortnight into this new government, and already the Cabinet are at war with each other. Not even in private. It's all being done in public, through the airwaves and on the television. And it's all over this business of the 1% limit for public sector pay rises that was in the manifesto, was voted for in the Queen's speech, but over which Jeremy Corbyn won a lot of public support. But given that the Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary are openly against each other on this, what credibility does this government have left, and how long is Theresa May going to last as Prime Minister? I wonder what Philip in Ruislip makes of that.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening. What do you think, Philip?
Nigel, I've waited for this moment for years, and I've always dreamed about shouting at you, but unfortunately I agree with what you're saying. So it's going to have to wait for the time.
Okay, well, wait for another debate.
But, at the end of the day, the way I see it is this. They are completely incredible, the Tories. On Wednesday...
I tell you what, Philip, I'm not cutting you off because you want to scream at me, but if you're going to have a scream at me, let's make sure it's on a really good, clear line. So I'm going to let you go, and we'll reconnect the line and get you back up. And on texts and tweets, it's funny that, because you and your ilk seem to think that the foreign aid budget is a magic money tree, says George. Well, it's not a magic money tree, George, but what I have said before is that the foreign aid budget and our net contribution to the European Union is now pushing on for £25 billion a year. You know, it doesn't solve everything, but it could solve quite a few things. Theresa May needs to be replaced urgently, and the answer is staring us in the face. That's David Davis, and that comes from John. And our next caller is Martin. Martin, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Nigel. I'm fine, thank you. I'm still a member of UKIP, and I've met you a number of times as well. Background.
Okay.
Right, first of all, I believe our firemen and women, nurses and the police definitely deserve and need an increase. I can tell you now, training nurses, they get £9,000 a year. They have to pay for their training. First year, they get no salary at all. They have to pay for the car park, and they're getting a measly bit of money for their fuel costs. It's absolutely ridiculous. We're losing nurses.
So, Martin, I mean, I've seen, quite a lot of nurses are resigning, aren't they? And we've seen these figures over the course of the last few days, and that's got nothing to do with Brexit. That's because they're just basically hacked off, overworked, hacked off, and perhaps not being incentivised properly pay-wise. I get all of that, Martin, and since the start of this, I mean, I genuinely have some sympathy for people in both the public and the private sectors who've seen their money squeezed over the course of the last few years. But again, I'm going to throw the Nick Ferrari question to you, Martin. Where does the money come from?
Well, we seem to have money for many other things when any government decides they need to do something. So there's always some money available. I mean, I know at the moment, you mentioned our national debt at the moment was getting on for nearly 1.8 trillion. I've got the national debt clock.co.uk on at the moment, and it's actually 1.880419. It's nearly 420 at the moment, and the debt is growing at a rate of £5,170 per second. That is absolutely awful. And my biggest disappointment is Priti Patel. You know, she came in, she was going to do all this about, wanting to allay our fears for the cost of foreign aid. We shouldn't be sending any money out at all. All we're doing is putting money into a bottomless pit. These countries don't need money. They need training. They need education. They need physical help.
Well, one other thing we could do, Martin, for them, that Brexit might allow us to do to really help the third world is to give them an opportunity to sell goods and products, particularly agricultural products, to us, which at the moment we put massive tariffs on and make it hard for them. So, maybe in a Brexit world we can be fair. And Martin, I thank you very much for your call. And I go to Steve in Swansea. Steve, how long does May last in your view? Christmas, right? It'll all be over by Christmas, right?
I think she's out there. I just don't see she has any legitimate power. She has a cabinet which are basically saying anything and everything to try and be popular at the moment. And I think she has no potency to do anything.
Are they saying these things because they want to be popular? Or are they saying these things because actually there's a game afoot here to succeed her as Prime Minister?
Okay, I think their problem is they won, but they lost, and they don't know how to manage that.
Yeah, so you reckon she's gone by Christmas, and who takes over from her?
They're not going to be any better, are they? So they might just skip a generation.
What, and go for a young one, you mean?
Yeah, I think because all these tainted, Brexit and all that, they're going to be tainted and judged by austerity, which looks like it hasn't worked.
Well, the word austerity is used all the time, and it has been austere for some people. It has been austere for some local authorities, but it's a bit difficult to genuinely call it austerity when we're still running an annual deficit of 52 billion sterling. But, Steve, you're feeling pretty pessimistic about the whole lot. Thank you. Now, Phil in Ruislip, do we have a decent phone line now?
Can you hear me?
That's better.
Good,
right, Phil, talk.
Okay,
so talk to me.
So the way I see it is, as I was saying, the Tories, to me, are completely incredible. And the reason they're incredible is this. The way I see it is this. On Wednesday, the Tory MPs, they unanimously voted against the amendment to lift the 1% pay cap. On Monday, Gove, Johnson, other Tory MPs, suddenly they come out against it now. And you think to yourself, if only there'd been a way that you could have changed this before now. Oh, something like the amendment to the Queen's speech, which you voted against. Now, to me, the worst bit is they don't all suddenly care. They're just sort of jostling for power with May and Hammond, and they're putting pressure on them. And that's the only reason. It's completely self-serving. And to me, it's the same old Tories, and they're playing political games with everyone's money, everyone's future. And, it's for nothing but their own gain. They've seen that they're on a loser here, and they've just changed their mind because it helps them out. That's the only reason. So there's no credibility whatsoever.
I can't disagree with a word of that. I mean, I think that's exactly how it looks to me. It's selfish, it's self-centred, it's self-serving, and do they really care about people working in the public sector? I wonder. I'm not sure. Having said that, Phil, I'm not sure if we had a Labour government, they'd be much better. Career politics being what it is.
I would disagree with that.
You would disagree? So you think Labour are much more genuine and much more sincere, yeah?
I think that there are certain facets of the Labour Party who aren't. I saw this, this amendment that Chuka Umunna attempted to make, but when you look into it, that was obviously political jostling as well. They knew it wasn't going to go through. He didn't even agree with what he was saying in the amendment by the sounds of it. Now, whilst I was a Remain voter and completely disagreed with you and all of the other Leavers, at the end of the day, I disagreed with what he said, and the main reason is because he didn't believe it. If it was someone who actually believed in what he was saying, then perhaps, but I think there's a lot of political jostling within the Labour Party. I think there are some good people. I think the leader is one of those good people, myself. I think he's a good person, a good guy, and I think an honest person, and we need more honesty in politics.
Phil, I absolutely agree. When there is a subject upon which I opine that you disagree vehemently, we'll put you on immediately, I promise you. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Dexter, in Edinburgh, how does the Tory government look from Scotland?
Well, up here, they look a bit in disarray, I'm afraid. Hello, Nigel. It's good to talk to you.
Good evening.
I'm in favour of keeping Mrs May in power, and I would like to stay because I want to get Brexit right. And I think to chop and change our PM would probably do some harm to our prospects of getting a good one. I don't see what's in the Conservative Party by having this kind of disarray and disagreement amongst its cabinet members, because it's not going to advance their cause any. I think they need to get two things in order: one, Brexit, and the other is our finances.
Well, actually, isn't the truth, Dexter, that a public spat between cabinet ministers less than a fortnight into this government is actually very bad for our country?
Of course it is. And what I'm concerned about is the Conservative Party sounds a bit more like Labour. I mean, I voted Conservative because I believe in certain things, and one of them is financial rectitude, doing things financially correct. Paying our bills, being responsible. You pay our way as individuals and as a nation, and we've gotten that lesson. We're just way behind the curve when it comes to learning what to do about that. I mean,
well, when they got in, Dexter, in 2010, they said they would have eliminated the deficit by 2018, and here we are in 2017, and it's still running at over 50 billion a year, and now they tell us they would have eliminated it by 2025. I'm not sure anyone believes them, Dexter, do they?
Well, I don't think they do, and that's the problem. I just think that I didn't think Mr. George Osborne as a Chancellor. I just thought his whole approach was to, just dribs and drabs, instead of actually tackling things like cutting back quite severely on our foreign aid and
none of that, Dexter. Dexter, none of that. None of that is happening, Dexter. But no, Conservative voter there from Scotland, and he's a bit disillusioned too. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's 7:30. Well, the government's at war with each other. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, Philip Hammond, the Chancellor. Hammond says they must stick to the position that the public sector pay cap of 1% must stay. Boris now saying we should throw that out of the window and ease it, despite the fact he voted for it just last Monday. And the government does look to be in shambles, and it does look, although personal ambition seems to matter more than steady, strong and stable, they were going to talk about, weren't they, government for this country. But let me say something good about the government, because I think actually something good over the weekend really has happened. When I saw the Conservative manifesto, it was absolutely wishy-washy on the issue of fisheries and on the issue of taking back our territorial waters and our rights under international law. It really was very weasel-worded. I didn't like it one little bit. Well, now, of course, the man really in charge of fisheries is Michael Gove. And Michael Gove's father, as you may know, was a fishmonger up in Aberdeen, and saw the massive decline Michael saw in his lifetime that happened to our fishing industry as we gave away about 80% of the fish that swim in British territorial waters to the EU fleet. And as an MEP, a briefing arrived on my desk in Strasbourg this morning. Not that I got there to see it, because my plane was late, but the last sentence of it I thought was actually very, very encouraging. It said, when the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, we will no longer be bound by the common fisheries policy, and as an independent coastal state, we will manage our fisheries in accordance with the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea, and we'll be able to control and manage access to UK waters out to 200 nautical miles or the median line. And that, for those of us that have been campaigning to get our fishing rights back, are you listening, Bob Geldof? That is fantastic news. And I think I do actually believe that Michael Gove intends to do this. It's one of the best bits of Brexit news I've heard for a very, very long time. And get this right, it is worth billions every year to the UK economy and potentially tens of thousands of jobs too. So that at least is good news. But what is not particularly good news is the almost omnishambles that this public sector pay cap is turning into. Amelia is my next caller from Leeds. Amelia, is Mrs May's government in a bit of trouble?
No, not at all.
No. Go on, tell me.
And look at Michael now. He's not going to be in contention because he's got his teeth into something he really cares about.
Yes, he is, and I've just and you know, I've just been very praiseworthy. You know,
yes,
I mean, for me, Amelia, as an MEP, I've been there since 1999. I've very rarely received anything from the UK government that I thought was encouraging at all, and this is. So that's good. But, Amelia, OK, you're a supporter of the Prime Minister and the Tory party, but it's not very pretty, is it, to have a public disagreement on this policy, on this 1% pay cap, and it's going on at the highest level, isn't it? Because, you know, we've literally got the Foreign Secretary set against the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yes, because what he's saying, I think, is, see, we are listening and we are making representations on your behalf to the Prime Minister to think again.
But should that be done in public when you've literally just about put together a government? You've had to get the help of the DUP. It's cost another £1 billion to do it. Surely these conversations, if we were going to have a proper, united government that genuinely wanted to work in the interest of the country, surely these conversations go on in private, don't they?
Well, I think she had a cabinet meeting over the weekend with all of her chaps, because Michael Gove was being seen going in there, and Boris. So they have been having these conversations, and she's obviously having conversations with Mr Hammond, and I think things will be said in the next autumn budget about pay rises, because they are listening to the, the Pay Commission Board. And
well, I think I agree with that, Amelia, but, you know, we are currently July the 3rd. Are we going to go on between now and October having a public disagreement over this? What good does that do them as a government?
I think there'll be one or two little statements coming out, possibly even during Prime Minister's question time, possibly on Wednesday, coming up about this. So there might be a little bit of whatever in there. But every time she does something, everybody says, oh, she's done another U-turn. Oh, she's done another U-turn. Instead of saying, oh, thanks very much.
Well, so you think Theresa May's position is solid and there's not really a problem?
Well, if I've been listening to your programme since you came on air, if David Dale does become the next Prime Minister, who's going to negotiate Brexit?
Yes. Now, hang on. Do you mean Ian Dale or David Davis?
David Davis.
I know you did. Look,
David Davis, who's going to negotiate Brexit?
No, well, look, that's right. It is possible, of course, that given the importance of this, that the Prime Minister could personally take charge of those negotiations. That is possible. But Amelia, I have to say, I don't quite share your optimism about the way this government is shaping up. And I think, as I say, to be at loggerheads in such a short space of time is not pretty. But Amelia, thank you very much for your call. Zach in Reading. Amelia thinks it's all going to be okay. Do you?
No one knows is the honest truth, but congratulations on the fishing victory that you've just, and the whole country's got.
Fabulous news.
Congratulations to everybody. So great news there. I wanted to put forward a couple of points. Point number one is the deficit and the debt. Now, yes, you are absolutely right to clarify what is what, because I actually think people are quite confused about what is what. So thank you for clarifying that first. So secondly, who do we owe this debt to and why? Thirdly, what happens if I can't pay my mortgage? My bank or building society or whatever will come and repossess me and I'm out on the street. So what's going to happen if we keep building? And it appears, you said, 800 billion 2010 and then 1.7 or 8 trillion or something. I mean, the numbers are just mind-boggling. I mean, you know what it is? The way I look at everything is, if there's a wolf in the picture and there's a lion in the picture, who are you going to take on to try and survive? So we can't start paying the nurses more, the teachers more, the firemen more, the police more, because where does this stop?
Well, Zach, governments can go on borrowing, provided that lenders, that's people that buy, government or gilts, as we call them in this country, but provided people who buy government bonds think the government actually will pay the money back. Now, when the markets start to think, are we actually going to get our money back? Then suddenly the interest rate goes through the roof, and we've seen that in countries like Greece over the course of the last few years. I'm not suggesting right now that there would be a serious crisis in terms of the international markets or domestic ones thinking the government wouldn't pay it back. But I do think that naturally interest rates will go up at some point in time, and that we are leaving an absolutely colossal debt to our children. I mean, already the interest that the government has to pay to service this debt level is more than the size of the UK defence budget. Just to give you some idea, of what we're building up here. So that, I mean, without going in deeply into bond markets, gilts, as we call them, Zach, that's roughly how it works. But I do think that we've had a very false debate in this country. The opposition, Labour Party, in the last two elections, have just talked about austerity, but without actually ever confronting the fact that actually we're still living considerably beyond our means. So Zach, I hope that is helpful. Alex in Hampstead is our next caller. Alex, good evening.
Hello. Hi.
Hi there. So, is Mrs May's government in trouble? Has it lost its credibility?
To be frank, I find it quite terrifying for people to criticise the Tories so much, because what is the alternative? I think the alternative is socialism, Marxism, which seems to be incredibly popular with, dare I say, youth at the moment, bearing in mind watching Glastonbury and looking at social media. All governments, obviously, we must criticise, but bearing in mind that they are teetering on the edge here, it concerns me incredibly that we would be so quick to criticise the government, the only government that is...
Alex, I understand that. Of course I understand that. And Barrett texts in, he says, be careful what you wish for. So he's thinking much the same kind of thing. But I tell you what the alternative is, right? The alternative is that they pull together and start to work as a team. They have some element of collective cabinet responsibility, and they actually row in the same direction. I mean, surely with a brand new cabinet, a brand new government, we could at least expect that, Alex, couldn't we?
Well, I think what people seem to forget about, especially with this public sector pay increase idea, is that the government don't pay the public sector. It's taxpayers that pay the public sector. It's people like me, it's people like, the majority of the country pay for these people. So it should be up to us whether these people have a pay increase. So, well,
you could argue, Alex, that the Tory party... The Tory party won, in inverted commas, the election, saying that the cap should stay in place. So you could make a democratic argument that it should stay there.
Well, and I would agree. And if the public are really resistant to it, then, and I know this would be incredibly unpopular, but perhaps a referendum amongst taxpayers is required to ask whether we would be happy to increase income tax to pay for the public sector, or whether the public sector should be entirely privatised.
That would be a very interesting referendum. I'm not sure what the answer would be, but Alex, I understand your concern. I understand you're scared of Corbyn as a Tory voter, but I think you as a Tory voter deserve some rather better behaviour from the Tory cabinet than you're currently getting. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:46. Strong and stable government it is not, as the Foreign Secretary and the Chancellor of the Exchequer publicly, openly disagree on whether the public sector pay cap of 1% should stay in place or not. And it's a bit of a shambles, in my view, but some are very worried about the alternative. The alternative is terrifying, says Ray by text. A good idea would be to stop declaring that Britain is a wealthy country. It clearly is not. Well, it's all relative, isn't it? As I said earlier, Barat says, be careful what you wish for. Everyone knows that May will only last until next June, says Muz. Well, if you know that, you better get down to the bookmakers, it seems to me. And I get a bit of criticism of my comment about that perhaps referendums are the only things that can change things in life. If we had more referendums, it would be more chaos, says Mark. Well, perhaps, Mark, it would, but at least what we did learn with the Brexit referendum is that it can actually change things. And if I believe what I got from the UK government this morning, that we genuinely are going to take back all of our territorial international fishing waters, then all I can say to that is yippee. Conrad in Cheam, has this government lost credibility?
I think they lost credibility years ago, yes, but it's not just the Conservative government, it's the Conservative and the Liberals and also Labour for the last four decades. But I think we should definitely provide more money for nurses and for public sector, and I think that money's there without raising taxes. One of the things that...
Now, Conrad, that was something that Michael Gove hinted at the weekend. So can you explain how that works, please?
What, without raising taxes?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I can. I saw a Bank of England report in 2012, which said that the implicit subsidies to the banking system was between 6 billion and 120 billion pounds. I looked at the Inland Revenue site to see how much money we actually received from the banks through taxation, and it was varied between 17.4 to 24.4 billion pounds, and that was over a number of years recently. Which means that the banking system is actually costing us a net loss of around 80 billion pounds. You then have the NHS, which after the 2012 Health and Social Care Act, according to books written by eminent doctors in the NHS who have researched this, that the additional costs in the NHS are around £10.9 billion in admin fees alone, which means that nurses are diverted from care into the office. They're not actually treating patients. You could repeal the 2012 Act and simplify the NHS, because it went from health authorities to private care trusts, to primary care trusts, which were 160 of those. And it's now...
So your point, Conrad, is we've managed this very badly. I mean, didn't Tony Blair lose nearly 10... Was it... How many billions did we lose on that computer system that they were going to move everything to? It's a lot of money, wasn't it?
Yeah, don't get me started on Tony Blair. The PFI was an absolute disaster. I mean, that was one of the nails in the coffin of the NHS here. I'm not a big Labour fan or a big Conservative fan. I think they both... they've really, and the only motivation I can see for that is that some of the MPs on both sides, all sides in fact, they have interests in the private health sector. The other saving that we could make, which is
we want to be a bit careful. We want to be a bit careful about sort of accusing the whole political class of being corrupt, don't we?
Not all of them. No, it's only a few. There's a lot of very good MPs in the House of Commons, and that are very knowledgeable. But unfortunately, there's too few of them. There's another way we could actually get the money, and that is an idea from the chartered accountant Richard Murphy, who actually came up with the idea of actually, if we invested a bit more in reclaiming some of the taxation of offshore accounts, that'd be £120 billion. There's other things that we could also...
Yeah, now, Conrad, you've given me a fair shopping list already, but your basic point that we've not been running our public services properly and wasting huge sums of money is a point that is well made and I think incredibly valid. Come on, there must be more of you out there who think Mrs May actually is doing a good job and it's all okay. We had Amelia in Leeds. There must be more of you. Maybe Rahid in Northampton is going to tell me that he thinks that actually the government has made a good start.
No.
Right, okay.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest here. I don't think the public sector pay cap is too harmful to credibility. There's always been division within government. Westland, Maastricht, this has always been occurring.
Yes, Rahid, but those divisions came when, the governments had been in place for a couple of years and issues of real high principle turned up that divided. Westland, for example, was, 3.5 years after the previous general election. Maastricht was slightly shorter after the 92 election. But my point, Rahid, is, yes, of course there are always divisions and different approaches. But for it to be public within a fortnight of a new government, I find pretty extraordinary.
It's quite extraordinary, but this was quite an extraordinary election, so I think it is to be expected. And these are extraordinary times with Brexit. I think the thing that's really cost her credibility, though, is the fact that just prior to the election, you have two major terrorist incidents. This is followed just after the election by the Grenfell Tower fire. Now, these three things essentially targeted the main line of, I suppose, attack from the Labour Party, which was austerity. Now, whether or not you agree with it, it clearly harmed the image of the Tory party in the public psyche, especially coming off the back of Theresa May claiming to be supporting those who are just getting by. And then you have the Grenfell Tower fire, in which 80 died. I mean, I think the thing that's cost her credibility are these crises that appear to just be continuing, and that can be linked back to her own policy. And the government isn't addressing that in the way they should be.
That may be a reasonable thing to say, and of course governments are hit by crises and difficulties, and Grenfell Tower, goodness me, one of the worst disasters that's happened since 1945 in our country. But what I would be expecting to see is a bit more cabinet unity and a debate on a major policy change. It is major because, the pay cap was in the manifesto, it was in the Queen's speech, it passed in Parliament last Monday. If there is going to be change, then surely that should be done together as a government in a unified way. And they're not being very grown up, are they?
Not really, no. And I think we can really see where the Tory party's loyalties lie. Theresa May, and to be honest, any leader of that party, is really quite expendable. The policies won't change a terrible amount. You have the public sector pay cap. There's division over that. I personally think it's probably just an act aimed at moving the chess pieces in a way. I don't think anyone's terribly serious about their views on this. I think the wider issue is that Theresa May really is incredibly weak and she's at the mercy of her cabinet, and they recognise that. And they're essentially just playing on it. They're attempting to capitalise on her on her difficulties at the moment.
On her weakness, I know. I think, listen, I've been making that point since the top of the hour. Rahid, thank you very much indeed for your call. A country which is nearly $2 trillion in debt is not a wealthy one, I'm told, after I've said relatively we're rich. Well, okay. Yes, she does have credibility, and you should support her if you want Brexit delivered. And that's from Theresa. I think it may be a different Theresa. I don't know. I do want Brexit delivered. Of course I do. And one of the reasons why I think it was actually worth the £1 billion to get the DUP on board is because, I want us to have a stable government. Anyway, thank you very much for your calls, texts and tweets. I have to say that what is going on here is personal political ambition. They're seeing the weakness. They're seeing the weakness of the Prime Minister, and they're jockeying to take over from her. It is selfish. It is ugly. There are very important things to do in this country at this time, and I think they should all just grow up and put the interests of the country first. But you know what? They won't, because they're career politicians. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it'll be Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you very much, Nigel. And we're going to